Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. My name's Matt Ginniver. I am a senior project manager with the MOLA-Wessex team. I've been working as the project director on the archaeological mitigation works, leading a very large team of archaeologists from MOLA-Wessex joint venture. I just want to very quickly introduce MOLA and Wessex. We are actually a partnership between two of the larger archaeological companies in the country, so Museum of London Archaeology and Wessex Archaeology. Both are long established and large archaeological firms and educational charities. We have very similar core values, and this is actually our first project we've worked together as a joint venture, so that's sort of quite exciting for us, and we're very sort of glad to be sharing the results of that. So today's webinar, I'm going to start by giving a bit of a background into the project itself, where in the world we are, and how we've got to the stage we're at now. I will then start running through some of the more interesting sites that we've had from the scheme, including some of the nice finds that have come up as well. After that, I will then also have a little bit of a talk about the future works that are still to come. This is an ongoing project. We aren't quite finished yet, and we have a lot of work to do now outside of the field in our labs, etc. So I will be running over that. So I'll move on to the next slide. Hopefully I'll work. Yes, here we go. So yes, I'll start just by a very quick introduction to the project itself. This is actually two projects in one, which can become a little bit confusing. It certainly has been as we've been working through it. We are actually working for ScottishPower Renewables, who are developing two offshore wind farms, both of which were consented in 2022. There is East Anglia 2 and East Anglia 1 North. It's two projects, but it's essentially one at the same time. They're using the same cable corridor running to the same substation area. So forgive me if I do slip in and out of referring to East Anglia 2 or East Anglia 1 North throughout this. It is all the same project. This is the actual route in a little bit more detail. So for those who don't know the local area, we are over on the east coast of England on the Suffolk coast, situated in between the two villages of Thorpeness and Sizewell, over at the sort of landfall side of the project. The offshore cables will make landfall just north of Thorpeness. They then travel up to Sizewell before they start turning west and running across the landscape there to a new substation area just to the west of Noddishall and north of Friston in this area here. There's approximately 10 kilometres of buried underground cable. It's a hugely rich area for archaeology and historical sites. Across this, say, relatively short cable route, we have had over 40 different sites that we've been working on, and there's at least another 10 to 15 sites that have been preserved in situ as well. So there's lots and lots of archaeology known about. We say it's a very rich area. Just in the local area, you've got Leiston Abbey. About 10 miles to the south of us is the very famous Anglo-Saxon site at Sutton Hoo. And you may also be aware that in the news recently, there have been a lot of archaeological works as part of the new power station at Sizewell C to the north of us. It's also been adding a huge amount of information to the knowledge of the archaeology in the area, and hopefully the works that we've been doing are all going to help feed into that. So the project so far. So we've actually been working on this project in the field since October of 2024. We haven't quite finished yet. We are within days, I think, actually, of completing our archaeological excavations now. So we've been in the field for slightly over a year, which has been, say, fantastic. We've had over 90 archaeologists on the scheme at any one time. Huge project for us, and it's been supported by a very large off-site team as well of managers, logistical team, admin staff, as well as the specialists working on the post-excavation work already. We have done over 40 sites in the field, covering an area of 24 hectares. That's the size of 17 football pitches, as it says there. That has, say, brought up a huge amount of archaeology. We won't be able to fit in everything today, but what we will do is talk about some of the more exciting sites that we've encountered. There will be more sites to talk about in the future as we sort of get further into the post-excavation work as well. So say this is a sort of initial summary of what we are finding, and hopefully in maybe in a year's time we'll have a bit more information to share again. It's important to note as well that this is just a single phase of archaeological works on this project. This is actually built on the back of several years of archaeological work that has gone before that, through ScottishPower themselves and their consultants at SLR. They engaged Headland Archaeology, another archaeological firm, who undertook desk-based assessments, trial trenching and geophysical survey before we got here. All of that helped define the areas that went to full excavation that we've been working on. And this is just a picture of, well, to be honest, a small part of the team that worked on the site. As I say, we had in excess of 90 archaeologists at any one time, but in actual fact, over the course of a year, that's actually involved several hundred individuals in the field itself, as I say, and many more supporting it from the various offices we have around the country. I'd also like just to say and mention at this point the help of the client team as well, who have all been involved. That includes many of ScottishPower representatives on site and in the offices, as well as their consultant archaeologists. And I would also like to mention we've been working in close collaboration as well with Suffolk County Council Archaeological Service, otherwise known as SCAS, who I'll also mention throughout this talk as well. So the first slide I wanted to bring up just to sort of discuss how archaeology sort of fits into the planning process. This is quite a good example slide of the various things that have gone before us, and then also sort of feeds into what we've been doing. So it may seem obvious, but obviously we can't and don't want to dig up the entire cable route looking for archaeology. It would be massively wasteful and expensive, and also quite damaging to the archaeologists there. Our goal is actually to try and limit the damage done to the archaeology by development, and this is how we can be beneficial to both the developer themselves, and also try and limit the damage to the archaeology and get the most information out of it. So the process actually starts, as say, several years before we got into the field with desk-based assessments. So that's where documentary research is done into the existing archaeological record. So all known sites in the area are assessed, and that helps build an initial gazetteer of known sites around the area that can be avoided by the route. We then follow that up with non-intrusive surveys. So this slide shows the grayscale survey of some geophysical data. We also do other non-intrusive techniques such as LiDAR. You may know that one. It's where we gather point data from usually an aeroplane flown over the site, and it sort of takes millions of points on the ground. It gives us good topographical data. We also undertake earthwork surveys and field walking. So all of that information gets fed into the system to sort of even more refine our knowledge of the archaeology before we sort of go in on the ground. Then comes the first pieces of intrusive survey. So you can see on this image here, we've got these outlines of trenches. So as I say, before we started our excavation works, the whole route was intensively subject to these evaluation trenches. These were both targeted on geophysical anomalies and other known anomalies to try and sort of work out whether they actually are archaeology, to prove their existence, but also they would have been placed in areas where the geophysics or indeed the other background information turned up blank, so that we can be sure that those blank areas are actually sort of clear of archaeology, as it were. And say this shows quite nicely actually how the trenching has both confirmed, sorry, I've gone too far, confirmed the existence of the archaeology here, and actually found additional features that didn't show up massively well on the geophysics. And from that, we've been able to then define the areas of excavation that we've now come in and done. So the big blue shaded area here is actually one of our archaeological sites. And say that's been very specifically designed to get the most archaeological information that we can and preserve by record the sites that couldn't be avoided by design. So what will often happen actually is, rather than excavating these sites, the information that's been gathered through these non-intrusive intrusive surveys is fed back to the designers, who can then try and actually avoid the archaeology. And what we do there is we designate an area as preservation in situ, so that throughout the construction process that area is protected and the archaeology won't be damaged. So there's a whole mixture of preservation in situ areas across this scheme, as well as excavation areas where we were unable to design around it. Sorry, so now that we're done with a bit of a background, I'm going to take you through, first of all, some of the prehistoric activity that we saw scattered along the whole route, and then after that I will start talking about some of the individual sites that we've been excavating. So I'm just going to start first of all by talking about a category of finds that we've been uncovering sort of across the scheme, but they aren't necessarily tied into sort of very easily defined archaeological activities. So we find these across all of our sites, and that's our prehistoric stone tools, quite often flint and stone tools. We've been finding them largely from the Neolithic period, which is about 4000 BC to 2300 BC, and the Bronze Age. We have had potentially earlier ones from the Mesolithic, and potentially ones running all the way through to the Bronze Age and Iron Age as well. Part of the process now is to sort of try and date some of these finds. What we tend to find with these, to say, is they are often chance discards, or indeed placed into individual isolated pits around the area. So it's quite difficult to talk about them in terms of sites. It's easier to sort of look at them at the moment as evidence of activity in the area. And I'll move on to the next slide. You can see some of the better examples of these. So the lovely leaf-shaped arrowhead on the right hand of this slide is a Neolithic arrowhead. Stylistically, we can date it to that period. That wasn't really found in any particular context on the site. It was found in a small isolated pit on one of our sites, and this is quite common for these types of prehistoric find, especially sort of early lithics. They're quite often found in the middle of nowhere almost, and that kind of represents possibly the use of these finds. I mean, obviously arrowheads, you're talking about hunters moving throughout the landscape, and they can often be lost by chance, and sometimes they are just again signs of the almost nomadic status of some of these peoples. They're not really that well settled in one area, and they will be working flint tools together in and around campfires in say remoter areas. So we've been finding, say, quite a few of these across the scheme, some really nice examples. So yeah, there's a couple of arrowheads on this slide, as well as a flint scraper. The next slide is of a lovely polished flint axe head, again probably from the Neolithic period. They're very fine and high status find, especially when they polish these. So you can see polished, it's been knocked around a bit in the ground, unfortunately, and has had some damage. But when you see the sort of polished face, we know that that's something that has been worked on over a very long period of time to really refine it into both a very decorative as well as functional item. And this is another example of another axe head, not quite as nice quality, as in it hasn't been polished, but it's again another example of the types of finds we've been finding up from across the site. And this one was actually uncovered from a site that was largely medieval. So this is what we would refer to as a sort of residual find. It's been in the area and is evidence of earlier activity, but is not particularly tied to that site. And again, this one is a very nice example of a either late Neolithic or early Bronze Age tanged and barbed arrowhead. So you can see the barbs and the tang, which is where it would have fitted into the shaft of the arrow. That's actually been snapped off. But this was again found on a site that was predominantly a later Roman site. So now that we've talked briefly about the nice flint finds, I'm going to start talking about individual sites across the scheme. I'm going to work, broadly speaking, from the substation sites at the east end of the scheme, west end of the scheme, across east to the landfall. The first site that we're going to look at is actually just to the north of Friston. at the area of the new substations. As you can see here, this is the post-excavation plan. Just to give a brief sort of explanation of how to read these plans. These are sort of very basically phased post-excavation plans. And when I talk about phasing, that's to say that we have begun the process of assigning features to individual periods. This is an ongoing process. As we get more and more information gathered, we are able to refine this. So a lot of the sites I'll be talking about today, because we're still relatively early in the overall process, the phasing is not hugely refined. So you'll see on this phone, there's a number of features that are referred to broadly as prehistoric. Some of them we've been able to identify specifically as Iron Age. Some of them specifically as Roman, and there are also an awful lot of features on here that are currently undated. That will change as we get more and more information together. So a lot of these features will have been sampled and we will have recovered finds from them. We will be waiting on more scientific dating methods such as carbon dating to sort of feedback and give us more and more information. So forgive me, to fit everything in on this slide, we've actually orientated it slightly off what it should be, north is actually to the left of the picture. This is one of the largest sites we excavated on the scheme. There's a significant amount of activity on this site from multiple periods. As I say, we've got a fair amount of prehistoric activity, Iron Age and Romano-British field systems, which appear to be on slightly different orientations, which show a bit of a break in continuity. And say a lot of currently undated pits, although some of them we are beginning to refine down to the Bronze Age, which I'll be talking about in a second. As I say, there's an awful lot going on here, and a bit too much to sort of get a clear picture of all the activities that we are aware of at the moment. So I'm going to actually focus on one element of this site in particular, which is the pits. So this is an example of some of these pits that have been excavated to date. Now, when we talk about pits and archaeological sites, it's a very broad feature type. Essentially, it is a hole in the ground. The reasons for why people dug holes in the ground in the past are quite extensive. It may well be that these are storage pits. They could be refuse pits for disposing of waste from settlement. Sometimes we're talking about very large extraction pits to recover clay or aggregates. We're still, as I say, on this site working through a lot of the information that we've been gathering to try and actually assign function to a lot of these features. But one of the ones that really did stand out when we were on site were these pits. Now, we had a bit of a cluster of about a dozen of these pits towards the southern end of the site, which very quickly we realised were cremation pits. So cremations come in sort of two types in prehistory. We tend to find you get what we call unearned cremations, as in they are the cremated remains have been gathered up and placed directly into an empty pit, and then it's been filled in. Or we sometimes get the cremated material placed, as today, in a ceramic urn. So that's why we call them earned cremations, and then placed in the ground like that. So the majority of the cremations from this site are what we would call unearned, as in they were not found within vessels. However, quite a few of the pits were found with a particular type of pottery associated with them. And that pottery is known as beaker pottery. Now, these are really, really nice examples, actually, and we've got quite a lot more of this from this site. They're very decorative, pottery. They come in various different types of decoration. You see here there's these various geometrics designs across the pottery, sometimes incised, sometimes sort of scraped across, sometimes pressed into the wet clay. It's quite distinctive, and it comes from a people who are known as the Beaker folk. They lived across Europe between say about 4,500, 2,500 years ago. And the arrival in Britain of the beaker folk is something that is very sort of obvious in the archaeological record. They suddenly appear. There is still debate as to whether this is due to migration of people or whether it's more of a trade and cultural spread. I think the current thinking is that it's a mixture of the two. It does show, obviously, that this part of the East Anglian coast did have probably a lot of sort of direct contact with the continent. So it could easily be that a lot of this pottery made it across from Europe prior to the sort of mass movement of people. To say these are really distinctive pieces of pottery, and it shows that we do have, as a lot of Bronze Age activity on this particular site, and indeed on other ones across the area. So just to the south east of this particular site, we have another area of extensive Bronze Age pitting. Again, it's a multi-period site. We do have an Iron Age trackway running across it, as well as medieval field boundaries. But buried beneath an additional layer of soil, we found extensive pit clusterings, and all the orange and orangey yellow ones you can see here are examples of Bronze Age pottery, so Bronze Age pits. As you can see here, they are extensively spread across this area. This image shows just quite how many of these pit features we found all clustered together in this area. We're not entirely certain yet of the purpose of these pits. So this area was largely without cremation. So this is say to the south, it's a couple of 100 meters to the southeast of the cremation burials that we found from a similar period in the first site we looked at. So this could be a bit more evidence of actual settlement. We're hoping, say, through future finds analysis, that we will get a better idea of some of the functions of these pits. We did get quite a few finds out from them, including, say, further lithic finds. So there's a couple of nice blades on the left hand side of this slide, as well as a scraper on the right hand side. So we talk about lithic finds into later prehistory, certainly, although in the, say, Bronze Age and Iron Age we started smelting and making items out of metal. Lithics were still very much used, so stone tools were still very much in use throughout those periods. And some further examples of this beaker pottery. And as I say, we've had lots of examples, and you can see all sorts of different designs and patterns. The piece of pot on the left there, that's what we tend to call incised. So what would have happened is, when the clay was still wet, they would have taken a sharp tool and pressed that directly into the clay to make little divots. The pieces of pottery on the right there, they've had more slightly different techniques. So they've been decorated with raised ridges of clay, as well as more geometric patterns on the one in the top right. So these are all very distinctive, and hopefully our pottery specialists will be able to compare these patterns to others that have been found elsewhere, and really narrow down the chronology on this particular site. So moving on now to the first site along the cable route, slightly away from the substation sites now. We've encountered a very interesting medieval site. So this is just to, for anyone who's local here, this is just to the east of Grove Road, which runs along the western side of this site. It's what we've been encountered here is quite a substantial medieval settlement site on the sort of northeastern part of the northwestern part of the site. But along the eastern part of the site, we've also had some Iron Age period post structures and pits as well. So again, another multi-period site. This is actually one of the sites that we were quite well aware of from an early stage. This slide actually demonstrates the results of the geophysical survey, and it shows that this is just part of a much larger site that stretches further across to the east. And it's thought that it's possibly a roadside settlement, maybe when either Grove Road itself or an earlier road existed on a slightly different orientation. And you can see from the trenching and the geophysics, we were well aware of the existence of the medieval elements of this site, but not so much the Iron Age, which was only picked up in the excavations itself. So this is an example of the medieval part of the site. So very large boundary ditches, which really show the extent of which the settlement was, how long the settlement was in place. So if I go back to the previous slide, sorry, you can see that we actually have multiple phases of ditches here. So it was a relatively long-lasting settlement where they've slightly changed the alignments. And as you can see, this is a section across one of these ditches. This is quite an interesting section, actually, because it sort of shows the types of material that have been dumped into the ditch when it's fallen out of use. And you can see where the arrows are pointing, several different deposits which are quite full of charcoal, fired clay and pottery. So it's very much domestic refuse from the settlement has been, say, deliberately put into this ditch to backfill it. And this is fantastic for us because it means that we can gather plenty of dating material that will help us really build the chronology of this site and work out when it fell out of use and when it was in use as well. We did as well find on this site a small isolated cremation. We don't currently have a date for it. It's really out on its own. So the arrow there is pointing to where we found this cremation burial. It could easily be related to the Iron Age activity, which is just to the east of it, but it's actually could equally be from an earlier period as well. It might be more related to the Bronze Age ones that we found on the other side of the road in the sites we just looked at before. The good news here is because it's got plenty of charcoal in the fill, we will be able to undertake some scientific dating to pinpoint that the date of this particular find. And at the other end of the scale, we found this lovely gilt silver clasp, which actually comes from a 16th century brooch, which was found during metal detecting at the site. This actually has been put forward to the treasure trove because it is over 300 years old and more than 10% precious metal. It's a lovely little find, actually, and it shows that it's probably a chance discard from somebody travelling along the road actually after this site may have fallen out of use, because it's to say it's actually sort of post-dates the main use of this site. But one of the important parts of when we're on site is to make sure that we have scanned all of the soil before we remove it through metal detecting. So this is a lovely example of some of the metal detecting finds that we've been collecting from the sites. So moving along the route now, we're moving along to a site just by Snape Road for anyone who's local to this area. And on this site, again, we've got another multi-phase site. In fact, this one has got evidence all the way from the Neolithic through to the modern period. It is quite a complicated site. There are lots of different phases with lots of different activities going on. And so we've got potential prehistoric roundhouse down on the eastern side of the site. We have a slightly later prehistoric trackway coming through. We have field boundaries. We have some potential metalworking from the Iron Age period, and then later medieval and post-medieval field boundaries as well. So it's a very, very busy, complicated site. The interesting finds from this one include this lovely polished flint chisel, say probably from the Neolithic period. Again, this was just found in an isolated pit. In fact, it's this pit down here. There's very little other Neolithic activity from this site. A find like this, I think it's quite unusual. It probably would not have been lost by accident. It's much more likely that that was placed into the pit in a deliberate fashion. This does happen quite a bit in prehistoric context that nice finds like this are placed deliberately in a pit as what gets called a closing deposit. Quite why, we're not sure. It might just be it may well be a burial for the tool itself, or it might be that the pit itself has fallen out of use and they chose to deliberately place something in there as a sort of votive offering to close it. But again, we will be studying this in more detail to try and get a bit of an idea about when and where this was placed there. And the other really interesting find from this particular site is this lovely crucible. So this is most likely Iron Age in date. It would have been used to hold various metals for the creation of alloys. So alloys such as bronze, so they would have had tin and copper in there and melted together. That shows that we've definitely got metal working on this particular site. And to sort of go along with that, we've found evidence of potential metal working areas. We don't have any obvious sort of kilns or things like that on this site, but what we did have are several locations where we can see discoloration in the soil from heat. So you can see in both the top and bottom pictures here, the sandy soil has taken on a very pink color. That is where a fire, and indeed maybe multiple fires, have been situated above that particular pit, and it is through the intensity of the heat has discolored the soil, and also plenty of sort of charcoal in the backfill as well. So these are probably our locations where fires were being held to heat up the metals hot enough that they could be alloyed together and worked into items. Moving on from that particular site, and more looking again more at more industrial activity. A bit further along the route, just to the south of the village of Nonashall, we have a relatively recently completed site. So this one we've not even had a chance to actually properly phase yet. Lots and lots of activity on this site. And you can see from the plan here, plenty of enclosure ditches in various different shapes and sizes. But the arrows here point to half a dozen of these possible kiln features that we found across this site. Most of them we think are medieval in date, most likely to be pottery or tile kilns. And the next few slides are just a few examples of the kilns themselves. So they are mostly circular in shape, with some ancillary structures existing for some of them. The level of preservation of these kilns does vary quite considerably. This is one of our better preserved kiln bases. So this is actually quite a nice one to look at and get an idea of what these may have looked like. So this is the base of the kiln, and it's been formed out of flint cobbles, probably because they're quite resistant to the heat. Around the edge of that, you can just see the sort of edge of the clay superstructure. So this would have probably stood as a sort of large clay dome above this kiln, but all that we've got left now are the remnant walls. And you can see on the right hand side of this photograph some of the pottery that we've recovered from within there. And again, you can see how the inside of this kiln, the pinkish colour where the heat has discoloured the clay and the cobble base. And again, you can see where we've had several others very similar to that. And we've started excavating a section through here where you can again see how this has been constructed from a mixture of cobbles and then clay around the edge, built directly into a shallow pit. And this is another working shot of one of these kilns under excavation. As I say, some of them are not quite as well preserved as others, but obviously we have recorded all of them fully, and it will help build up a picture of what was going on throughout this area. What I think it does show is that although we say have plenty of other archaeology from this site, we're probably situated slightly to the periphery of a larger settlement. Industrial works like this would have been quite unpleasant to have lived too close to. So much like today, they tend to get sort of located on the outskirts of settlement or away from settlement. So it's interesting to find so many of these features spread out across this this particular area. It suggests that there's quite an industry ongoing, and that we are close, to say, to other medieval settlement that's probably situated a bit further away from this area. As well as the cremation, as well as the kilns, we also found yet another cremation on this site. It's sort of it seems to be quite a common occurrence on a lot of these sites. This one, though, is a bit later in date than the Bronze Age ones that we've had before, and has actually contained a couple of quite interesting finds. On the left-hand picture, you can just about make out next to the brush that the archaeologist is holding an iron nail. More detail on the next picture. So this iron nail is probably related to the either the coffin or the cremation pyre itself, the structure of a cremation pyre, and it will have all been swept up together when the after the cremation fire had burnt out and the ashes were being collected. Likewise, this large chunk of wood, carbonized wood, is probably directly from the funeral pyre. These are really interesting, and the nail itself we will probably be able to date typologically, and then the charcoal will also give us really useful dating material that we'll be able to hopefully date this cremation to a much more precise period. So very close to these medieval kilns, but slightly predating it, is one of our more exciting finds from our works. So this one was completely unexpected, actually. We had a very small amount of Anglo-Saxon finds from the evaluation trenches in one of these in one of the fields near here, but we didn't really have any clue that this site was going to be uncovered. It's actually spread across 3 different fields. This is 2 of the fields together, and there's a third field on the next slide, which I'll just quickly go to. This is actually to the west of the earlier ones. You can probably just about make out in the plan these timber-built structures, and there are numerous of them. Some of these are quite long. I don't know if you can see the scale here, but some of these structures are 20 to 30 meters in length, and similarly 10 to 15 meters wide. They are a mixture of post built and beam slot built. So when we see a beam slot, it's a single elongated trench into which timbers would have been placed. The others are post holes, so they would have just been the structural timbers would have been embedded into the ground individually. This has been dated so far to the late Saxon period. We have dates ranging from approximately 600 to AD to about 1200 AD. Quite exciting. We don't get an awful lot of Saxon settlement sites around the country, and when we do, they do tend to be quite rare, to be honest, and quite exciting. This is a very large settlement, lots and lots of buildings. We don't know for sure yet quite how many buildings, because we do need to do more work on the phasing of these structures. For example, we don't know whether this it represents multiple buildings that are all in use at the same time, or indeed that there are only a couple of buildings that get moved around over time. We also don't know whether these are individual structures or whether they are sort of larger halls with wings coming off of them. So there's a lot of work to do to understand the construction of these buildings, how long they were occupied for, and indeed how extensive this settlement is. What's quite interesting here is that these green features that you can see running across the northern edge of this site appears to be a trackway, and it runs under the modern public right-of-way that runs along this area is along a lane called Fitch's Lane, and it does appear that modern public right-of-way corresponds very closely to this Saxon route that runs along here, and I say runs on to the next site. It's just running to the north of here as well, and we're not quite sure quite how far this settlement does extend along there. But certainly we have this cluster of buildings in the centre here, and even down in the far eastern part of the site on the other side of the trackway, we have the remains of a floor surface down here as well, which suggests this is a very extensive settlement site. So yeah, these are early medieval, say Saxon early medieval timber framed longhouses. Most of they have exist, although we've had left other post holes and beam slots. They give us the shape and size of the buildings and the layout of the settlement. So we have at least 7 or 8 individual buildings, but it could be anything up to 20 or 30 individual structures across these sites. It'll take us a while, I think, to work out exactly how many we have. And I say we've got dates ranging between the 6th century and the 13th century. I think probably abandoned by 1300, this site, although say more work could refine that chronology and push it out or bring it in. The lovely find you can see on the left hand side of this page is a Anglo-Saxon brooch that has been dated to around the 500s AD. That's probably one of the earlier finds from the site. And the next few slides are just going to be some examples of the houses under excavation. And some of the pottery that has helped us to date these buildings. So this is a piece of early medieval pottery. It's always very useful when we find a piece with the rim that's very, what we would say is very diagnostic. It helps us compare it to other known examples and really get some precise dates. This is an overhead shot of one of the buildings nearing completion. As you can see, this is a mixture of post holes and beam slots. So you can see the individual post holes and then the longer beam slots. This is it nearing completion. You can get an idea of the scale of the buildings from the archaeologists visible in these pictures. And here's the final excavation of that same building. As you can see, we've removed all the soil from all of the features. A lot of it will have been collected into soil samples, and I'll explain a bit later what we'll be doing with those soil samples. And this final slide from this site just shows that floor surface I was mentioning, which was located towards the very eastern end of the site. So this is actually a compacted clay and cobble floor. As you can see on the other buildings, we only really had the remains of the timber post holes and beam slots. This is quite exciting. We don't often get the surviving floor deposits. So this is a compact deposit that would have been within a structure of some description. You can see that there is possible evidence of heating going on there as well. So again, we're hoping that further assessment and analysis of the samples we've taken from this site may help us assign a function to this particular floor. And this slide is just an example of what some of these buildings may have looked like. So this is actually from Butser Ancient Farm, which is it was a wonderful site of experimental and reconstructed archaeological sites. So they have a number of different buildings there from the Iron Age and from medieval and Saxon periods. But these are large timber halls. This is sort of similar to what we would have probably had on site. So moving on from that site, we'll move on to the next one, which is just along the road. This one again is still currently under excavation. In fact, we are just finishing up the excavations there this week. Again, it's another very exciting site where we have had a mixture of field boundaries, trackways, timber structures, and other features, including one of the more exciting ones, a box well. So this is a well with a timber box on the inside. Say it's too early yet to start assigning phases to this site, but it does seem to be a predominantly Roman site from the finds that we've had out so far. This is quite a useful pre-excavation shot of one of the timber structures. So you can see the site team here have marked up the photograph. The blue circled features are the post holes, red circled features are potential pits, and then the green feature is a ditch that's running through. It just goes to show the sort of how the different archaeological periods can intercut one another. And this is the same building while we are in the middle of excavating it. Again, you can see it's a substantial structure, may even be multiple phases to it. It's stretching off into the distance there, and you can see some of the pottery we've been recovering from those features as well. And this is a final excavation shot of that same structure. We don't know yet whether this is a Roman timber-built structure. It could easily be of a similar period to the Anglo-Saxon buildings from the previous site. Say currently we are waiting on the full finds assessment to confirm the date of this particular building. A feature that we are a bit more confident on the date of is this lovely box well. So this is actually still being excavated as we speak. These photographs are from about a week ago. We are hoping to complete the excavation within the next couple of days. Wells are incredibly exciting features to excavate. They tend to be, due to the very nature of what they are, waterlogged, which means a lot of organic remains get very well preserved. So you can see in the picture here, we have the timbers that are that were placed to surround the inside of this well are all very much still intact at this level. And in fact, we've been excavating this down and we've had very good preservation of timbers as we go. So the way this well was constructed is a much wider cut was dug. So they dug a much bigger pit and then they backfilled around this wooden box in the middle. So the wooden box would have remained open, the rest of it would have been backfilled. We've got some really nice Roman pottery out now from the backfill of the well, which will really helps date when this well was created. And what we're hoping is that from the deposits in the very bottom of the well, we will get some lovely organic remains, and it's not unheard of from wells to get things like buckets surviving, ladders, other wooden tools, leather items, as well as environmental remains such as pollen and seeds that survive quite well. Other things that tend to get found at the bottom of wells, and we're crossing our fingers that sometimes votive offerings will be placed in a well when it goes out of use. So you sometimes do get very high status finds such as coins and jewelry placed in the bottom of wells. Say as yet we haven't found any of those, but we are hopeful. So we will hopefully be able to update everybody on that when we are completed on this. So just along from that site, we've had more Roman activity. This site is just to the south of Aldringham. Again, still very much ongoing excavation on this site. So unfortunately, again, another undated phase plan, but most of the activity on this site we think is Roman. And the really exciting find from this particular site, it's quite similar to something that's come out from the excavations at Sizewell C recently. We've got a lovely, well-preserved pottery kiln, and it's, so if I go back to the proof, it's just this feature here. It's quite typical shape for a pottery kiln, this sort of almost figure-of-8 shape. And here you can see it both in mid-excavation and fully excavated. And you get a bit of a sense of the size of this feature from the surveyor standing inside the middle pit, as it were. It's a huge structure. This is it in the early days of excavation, so you can see it's full of burnt clay and absolutely rammed full of pieces of broken pottery. So Roman pottery kilns, they were often located close to settlement sites. Lots of pottery would have been produced locally for local consumption, so a lot of Roman settlements would have had a pottery kiln somewhere nearby. They tend to produce lots and lots and lots of pottery for the local populace, but a lot of pottery tends to get broken in the process. So most of the pottery we're gathering here is what's known as waste pottery or wasters. It's pottery that's either broken during firing, or as it's been transported from the kiln to places to sort of cool down. So we actually recovered in excess of 20 tubs of pottery from this particular feature. These are all 10-litre buckets. The next slide shows the type of pottery we've been recovering. So it's mostly this quite dark black ware. It's let's say all locally produced. Mixture of lovely base sherds, body sherds, rim sherds. I say all of this is very going to be very easy to match to other examples from local areas, very stylistic, and again we'll be able to use carbon dating to date this as well. Hopefully from comparison with other sites we'll be able to see how far and wide this pottery was distributed. It'd be useful, it'd be very interesting to know whether pottery produced at this site has been used across Suffolk or indeed across the eastern area of the UK, or even travelled further afield, and that's something that we'll be asking as we conduct further research on this project. This is an example of the fire pit, the firing chamber from the kiln. You can see again this really bright pinky orange sand at the base of it that shows that the intense heat from this kiln. And you can see here this would have been the central firing chamber up here, and you can see the superstructure of the kiln has collapsed in on it once it's fallen out of use. And at either end of the kiln you have these large stoking pits. This would have allowed people to stand low down and keep the firing pit well stoked, and it tends to get backfilled with the debris that would have built up around the pottery kiln whilst it was in use. So lots and lots of waste charcoal rich soil and lots of pottery, again waste pottery that would have been discarded nearby. All of that would have been swept back into these pits when the site fell out of use. So that's that's a brief summary of the main excavation sites. I'm just now going to talk about a couple of other areas of research, areas of fieldwork that we've been doing. So part of our works also involve reconstructing the ancient environment, and that helps us interpret the activities that have been going on various sites. And one of the pieces of work we undertook was a archaeological borehole or geoarchaeological borehole survey down next to the 100 River, which is runs very close to several of our sites. What we do is we take core samples with a machine. You can just see the machine on the back of the back of a trailer here. That drills cores down several meters into the deposits that are built up next to the river. These tend to be really quite silty and organic deposits because they've been constantly flooded and kept well, kept wet and anaerobic conditions, so conditions without oxygen, which means we get well preserved organic information out of these deposits. So from that we'll be able to date the sediments and recover evidence of past environments. So we often look for things like pollen throughout these cores, and that means that we can look at what the environment was like at the time. So we can see what sort of trees were growing, whether the environment was sparsely treed or whether it was dense forestation, things like that. So that will really help build up a picture of the overall environment of the scheme as we sort of go into further detail of reconstructing several of these sites. And one of the final things I want to sort of mention is that it's sometimes more recent archaeology that we'll be looking at as well as the ancient stuff. So one of the really important parts of World War II defences were situated along the east coast of Britain, and Suffolk's no different. We had several World War II era finds from across the route. One of them, and forgive the pictures here because it might not be that clear, was actually found down near the landfall end of the site, and it's this octagonal shaped concrete base. This is actually the remains of quite a rare feature, which is this is the Leiston Very High Frequency Fixer Station. Essentially what this is, and it was quite secretive at the time during the war, it's part of a radar and antenna array system that was used to help navigate friendly aircraft as well as identify enemy aircraft and U-boats. Essentially, the station would send out and receive very high frequency radio waves that up to a certain distance Allied airmen would be able to pick up, and it would help them pinpoint their location, especially for any flights that were going out at night or in heavy fog or heavy cloud. And these were really essential to the many operations that took place sort of during the war. These are not very well documented or preserved, unfortunately, because they would say very secretive at the time and fell out of use quite quickly, although this particular one was preserved for use throughout the Cold War as well. I think it was finally demolished in the late 60s. We've actually got the remains here of what we think is the central control. It would even be a tower or a low sort of control hub, but sort of situated throughout the rest of this field. There would have been smaller antenna arrays as well that would have fed into this. There are other known examples from around the country, and I think this is going to be a really interesting piece of more recent history that we can hopefully add a bit of information to. In addition to this, we also found remnants of other defensive features such as anti-glider ditches and anti-tank ditches at several sites along the landfall area. Again, we'll be working up the results of those into our next reports and hopefully be able to draw on, I'd say, other known documentary evidence for this in the area. So that sort of wraps up the fieldwork side of things, and I'm just going to briefly talk now about the next stages of the project. So we're now largely finished in the field, but we're still very busy with lots of off-site processes. So throughout the whole field work, we've also been sending all the finds and the samples that we collect back to our laboratories for processing. We are also now in the early stages of producing our reports and preparing the site archives, all of which will be fed into future analysis and publication work as well. So this is still, let's say, very early stages. All of the results I've given you today, they could be subject to change. We may refine our chronologies, we may change our interpretations, and I'll kind of give you a bit of an idea now of what's going on that will potentially affect that. So first off is processing of our samples and finds. So most of the features that we excavate in the field, if we encounter fines rich or organic rich soils as we go through, we will take soil samples. This allows us to recover much smaller artifacts and environmental remains that might not be visible in the field. So on the left hand side of this picture here, you can see a flotation tank setup. We take the tubs of soil, we run them through these tanks. What happens is that the very light organic remains float to the top of the water and get captured as they come off in a sieve. And then we also retain the residue as well. So we wash all the silts off of these. We collect up the organic flots, and then we also collect the heavier residue from the bottom as well. We dry them, and then we sort through. And you see in the bottom right picture here, this is an example of one residue being sorted through now, and very small fragments of pottery, of ceramic building materials, of stone, of flints, and of also charred cereals and other things like that are all collected out from these residues and kept and sent off to the specialists to look at. We also have many hand collected finds and artifacts and eco-facts from the field. So they are all cleaned again, they are catalogued, they are bagged and boxed and then sent off to our specialists for assessment and analysis. So this will be ongoing for several months while after the fieldwork finishes, and it has been going on for throughout the whole period. This is an example again of building material being cleaned, of animal bones being cleaned up, and of finds here being weighed and catalogued and entered onto our databases. We also have other activities going on in our lab. So sometimes when we find complete pots or indeed urn cremations, we make the decision to block lift them in the field. This allows us to undertake micro excavation in the lab. There are several benefits to this. One is that we aren't constrained by time. We can take our time over it. It means that we can also be a lot more precise with our excavation. We can individually record the position of every small tiny fragment of pottery or human bone, or indeed tiny finds that might be captured within these urns. So there are a couple of these that we have block lifted from site and that will be undergoing micro excavation in the lab over the next couple of months. So once all of the finds and environmental assemblages have been gathered, they get sent off to our specialists, and our specialists will be undertaking two main processes over the next few months. First of all, they will be conducting assessments, and that's where they characterize and quantify what they are looking at and provide some initial spot dates. What they will then do from that is make recommendations for further study, which will then take place at the analysis and publication stage. We will need to, indeed we have and will need to involve an absolute huge array of specialists in this process. This is just a few of the different specialisms that exist within archaeology. You have pottery specialists, building material specialists, archaeozoologists who look at animal bones, archaeobotanists that look at the seeds and the grain. We have osteologists who look at human bones. We have the lithic specialists who look at the worked stone, small find specialists who deal with a whole array of different small metal objects, pottery objects, etc. This list is non-exhaustive, and if anything, there are many subspecialisms within each of these. So within the pottery specialists, you will have specialists who focus on specific periods and regions, etc. So it just gives a bit of an idea of quite how many different people will be involved with the assessment of the different finds that are coming out of these sites. And this is an example of some of the assessment work that's taken place so far. So from the medieval site that we looked at earlier, this is a piece of medieval Grimston ware. This is really nice. This is very, very diagnostic, and it's a type of pottery which we know is made in Norfolk. We think that the main production site is in Grimston, which is near King's Lynn. They're these lovely glazed pottery jugs with faces of bearded men on them. They are dated from the mid 13th to 14th centuries. And yeah, they are thought to be rooted in the local medieval folklore of that area, and it's really interesting to find these on one of our sites, and it shows it'll add to our knowledge of the distribution of this particular type, and it really helps date our sites as well. This again is the same leaf-shaped arrowhead that you saw earlier. This again is very, very nice. This is described by our flint specialist as in mint condition, an unpatinated leaf-shaped Neolithic arrowhead. Again, it will be compared to other examples that are known from around the country, and will say be added into the different typologies. And it's just a really nice example. Other finds that have been recovered so far that our specialists will be looking at on the left here is a spindle whirl or spindle weight made of clay. These are found throughout the late prehistoric, Roman and medieval periods. This particular one I think is probably Roman, but again, it's yet to be fully dated. Once our specialist look at it, they'll be able to give us a much better idea of when it was made. The item on the right there is a Romano-British brooch. Our specialists have had a look at this one. It is likely to be a Colchester type bow brooch. These date to the mid 1st to 2nd century AD. Again, this is another lovely find, and will be, together with the other finds from this site, will help us to really sort of pinpoint the dates on this site and give us an idea of the sort of status of the settlement. And just to mention, yeah, it's not just the finds that will be going into assessment and analysis. We've also got the environmental results that will feed into that. So on the left here, you can see a fragment of bird skull, and on the right, you can see the articulated remains of, I think it's a dog burial actually, but again, it's very interesting to see when we do get articulated. So when I say articulated, it means that the complete skeleton of that particular animal was placed into this pit. Our experts will be able to assign a species to these animals, and also find other examples of similar practices of burying these bones from other sites, and it will go towards our knowledge and of the sites that they've come from. So the next sort of stage is now, as I say, we're putting together our assessments. From there, that will be fed into our recommendations. So once our assessment reports are completed, which will be towards the end of this year, we will come up with an updated project design, which will put our recommendations for further analysis and publication work in place. So we're hoping that, say, by the time the assessment reports are complete, we will have more to update everybody with then. And hopefully as well, we'll be able to start disseminating more of the results of our works. So yeah, that's the end of our quick roundup. I just want to thank again everybody who has been involved with this, especially the site team who have worked on site through a depressingly wet winter and a bone dry summer to get all the work done. And just again thank the management and logistics teams who've been supporting it, as well as the client teams who have also been extremely supportive throughout. Thank you for all your time.